In many churches, the worship leader opens up the service with this statement: God is good. And the congregation says back, all the time. And all the time, God is good. Is that true? Do you believe that? I have to admit, there have been times in my life when I questioned that. The first time I remember questioning it was over 30 years ago. My wife and I were getting married in Slidell, Louisiana, which is just outside of New Orleans. And everybody in my family, in my wife's family, came to that wedding. I mean, everybody, both sets of grandparents, aunts, uncles, brothers, sisters, cousins, second cousins, third cousins. Everybody was there. And just a few days before the ceremony began, I was sitting in the living room of my mother-in-law's home, and my wife's grandmother, Grandma Maskey, was in the kitchen. Now, to understand this, Grandma Maskey was one of the most beautiful women I'd ever seen. Beautiful hair, had a smile that when she smiled, her whole face just disappeared behind beautiful white teeth, and she smiled a lot. She was just as sweet as powdered sugar. She reminded me in many ways of Jessica Tandy, the actress. But Grandma Maskey had Alzheimer's. And by the time I came to the family, her mind was pretty much gone. She never called my name as long as I knew her. But she was such a lovely lady, a saint of a lady. I'd heard stories about how she taught Sunday school, how she taught vacation Bible school. My wife would go visit her when she was a little girl on their farm out in Nebraska. And I remember wanting to know more and more about this lady, but it was too late. And as I looked in and saw her in the kitchen, she had a rag and she was wiping down the counter. And I remember thinking I wanted to be able to ask her what my wife-to-be was like as a little girl. But that was not going to happen. And the more she wiped down the counter in those circles and she moved her way down through the kitchen, I began to think in my mind, what kind of God would allow this to happen to one of his choicest saints? So beautiful, so sweet, so faithful, and her mind is gone. And I can remember feeling a bitterness like bile in my throat and anger in my heart. And then she moved down around the corner of the cabinets and stopped at the kitchen sink. And there it was as if she lifted up her head and looked out an imaginary window. And in my mind's eye, she was looking out her farm window in Nebraska. Maybe she was seeing her husband walking up from the barn. Or maybe she was just watching the wheat bend in the wind. But as she was looking out that imaginary window, suddenly she began to sing. God is so good. God is so good. God is so good. He's so good to me. And then she went back to wiping down the counters. I was staggered by the implications of what I was feeling like God was telling me at that time. It was almost as if God was saying that my life was going to have needless pain and I was going to have a lot of disappointments if I didn't learn one simple truth. God is good. Psalms 34, verse 7 says, "Oh, taste and see that the Lord is good. I have